Welcome to our global check-in. When Corona met climate change, what changed? Think of these as two waves. A tidal wave we can more or less see on our horizon coming in to meet an even larger, slower wave that's been arriving for decades. What happens when the first, which may or may not be a child to the second, meets the second? Or think of ourselves looking back from 50 years forward and telling the story of how everything changed when they met, when we met, when we all meet. Welcome to the Ecoculture Lab Global Check-in, which marks the launch of Feverish World 2, From Pandemonium to Ecotopia, a 50-year project that we intend to work forward on together with everyone else, calling the project whatever you would like to. If we think of the next 50 years as a turnaround time, looking back at the last 50 years to learn lessons, what are the lessons? We'll be hearing some of those today. My name is Adrian Ivakhiv, and at this point, we'll begin to share screens from around the world. Sorry, 1 minute. When they answered the bell on that wild winter night, there was no one expected and no one in sight. Then they saw something standing on top of an urn, whose peculiar appearance gave them quite a turn. All at once it leapt down and ran into the hall, where it chose to remain with its nose to the wall. It was seemingly deaf to whatever they said, so at last they stopped screaming and went off to bed. It joined them at breakfast and presently ate all the syrup and toast and a part of a plate. It wrenched off the horn from the new gramophone and could not be persuaded to leave it alone. It betrayed a great liking for peering up flues and for peeling the soles of its white canvas shoes. At times it would tear out whole chapters from books or put roomfuls of pictures askew on their hooks. Every Sunday it brooded and lay on the floor, inconveniently close to the drawing room door. Now and then it would vanish for hours from the scene, but alas, be discovered inside a tureen. It was subject to fits of bewildering wrath, during which it would hide all the towels from the bath. In the night, through the house it would aimlessly creep, in spite of the fact of its being asleep. It would carry off objects of which it grew fond and protect them by dropping them into the pond. It came 17 years ago, and to this day, it has shown no intention of going away.
La agua es vida. Water is life. Bebe, nena bebe agua. The words so easily, casually roll off my mother's tongue. Drink, drink, water girl. I go to oblige, but when the sink opens, it's the color of bronze. Chunks of rusted metal threatening to sneak by, covered in. These things I try to forget. Like the bottles of opioids we flushed down the toilet, and now the water is hardly safe for flushing down excrement with. And I wake up in a cold sweat on many nights, envisioning the equator all made of water bottles, plastic in my chest, marinating in my guts, a sort of cyborg I've become. And then I recall that the air is no longer safe to breathe either. The water, the air. Drink, but not too fast, and breathe, but not too deeply. Nena, bebe, bebe agua. Water, drink. Drink water, because all the things that ain't it are gonna kill you, girl. Bebe, but not too fast and not too deeply. Drink and breathe, but don't, girl. My mother brags about looking so young because she hydrates, sun-kissed, drenched in water, but I wake up in a cold sweat. When I remember, swans are swimming in crude oil, white feathers blackened by debris, an ocean covered in N95 masks, the air contaminated by pollution, carbon emissions suffocating the trees and the clouds, and we must shelter home, indoors. The only place that is safe, they say, to stay home, indoors. But nena bebe agua, and my throat closes up with the words. A Nestle tycoon aims to own the water in Bolivia, and a war breaks. An oil tycoon threatens the sacred lands of Standing Rock. A war breaks. A political tycoon does nothing about the infested waters in Flint or Newark, and still, nena, bebe agua, nena, bebe agua. Replenish with this thing that you're 78% of. I awake but asleep, an ocean full of it. My guts too, all plastic, and the plastic be toxic, a pandemic of sorts. So we wash the bottles with soap, send more sorrow into the ocean, chemicalize our guts. My mother urging still, drink water girl, nena, bebe agua. But even that is poison now too. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Hi, Sarah here, Sarah Laborde from Western Australia. I'm just going to read a poem that I wrote for the occasion. It's called Stopping to Grieve and to Love. There is a virus riding on the illusion of our separation. We are asked to stop and invited to breathe. We check that the breath is full with a watchful intent that is new to our lungs. They respond, and as we inhale deeply, many of us feel grief. To grieve for our human family members with the ghostly flowers in their lungs, for the last breath of a loved one, neighbor, stranger, for those who have nowhere to go, for those who already had nowhere to go 4 months ago. To grieve for the illusion of progress, of control, of docile and linear lives, for all the breath forsaken, the unwept tears, the unmet eyes and the unheard cries. There was no time for them in the busy melee of our haste, our race to nowhere. To grieve also for our collective lungs, dendritic lifelines, large and small, choking in our wake, the dammed river, clogged artery, the ravaged forest, motionless chests, The panicked beehives lost nerves and minds. All these gestures of flow, of sharing, like hands that reach outwards and within and that sustain us from placenta to bones. All the branches and the bronchi that we have failed to love and instead try to rule and straighten and flatten, with side effects now growing to swallow us, rising seas, raging storms, infernos once far away, and virus highways. Beneath the grief, once we've dug ourselves in a little, we unearth love. Love for the family, friend, neighbor, stranger, and for this breath of ours and theirs. Love for these old-growth forests and free-flowing rivers. Now we remember that our belonging here came with a commitment to care. For the family, friend, neighbor, stranger, and for the patterns and rhythms of life itself. Its deep time, its deep heart, the one that knows the dark and makes the soil and the springs and the trees and the mantis and the light in her eyes. In these times of the virus, let us love together as we grieve together and honor our intrinsic bonds to family, friend, neighbor, stranger, and to soil, water, air, plant, microbe, and all. But without them, what is life? Have you thought of your soil, your water, your air, before it gushes from your tap or breezes through your room? Now is a good time to ponder. Do we support or hinder the ways of the river and the deep aquifer, the dance of minerals and the genius of plants? In these times of the virus, my wish is for the lover to take the hand of the hoarder in me, to acknowledge the wound, the fear, to feel the grief of one and all, and then to breathe deeply and thank the soil, the water, the air, the plants, the friend, the neighbor, the stranger for their gifts of life. Stepping, finally, and with trust, into the communal unknown that cannot be grasped but must be cared for. Thank you, that's it.
Good day to you on this Earth Day, wherever you are. My name is Robert Boschman. I study abandonments, specifically abandonments and how they occur over time in legacy uranium extraction communities worldwide. As a photographer, writer, and professor at Mount Royal University in Calgary, Alberta, my recent forays into human communities abandoned decades ago might be instructive now in the COVID crisis in which we are all staying home. Inside is a theoretical concept I have been exploring since discovering it in the recent works of Bruno Latour and Frédéric Thuety. They have collaborated to create and produce a drama called Inside, which played in Europe before the current crisis. As Latour stated during his address at Feverish World Symposium, convened by Adrian Ivakhiv and his team at the University of Vermont in fall 2018, the concept of inside really hit Latour while flying over Greenland and seeing the massive plates of ice and snow below. He saw then that everything is inside. The entirety of all life, the Earth system, contained within the thin blue film enveloping our planet. When I understood that during COVID, a time when a virus has convinced us of the common wisdom of retreating to our home dwellings, living inside immediately to me becomes apparent as a microcosm for what we are always doing anyhow under normal circumstances. This significantly changes for me how I understand an interior space. I enter abandoned spaces wearing protective gear, especially gloves and steel plate footwear. Simply put, the interior space I enter is one that is really no longer a default interior for human dwelling, but a former interior that continues to speak of its interiority even after it has been decomposed by nature. That relationship to time and nature is what gives it its power. It speaks to our now from its past. Sometimes I meet a human who has retaken one of these spaces for residential purposes. Here is a man named Byron, whom I met in fall 2019 in the former uranium extraction community of Jeffrey City, Wyoming, population 50. He has lived in semi-seclusion for over a decade in a former Esso gas station. He is a brilliant potter and artist who sells his work from the front of the Esso, now called Monk King Bird Pottery. He's lived here alone for 12 years. In this former station on the old Oregon Trail, Byron was already ready, in a way, for the current crisis. The condition for the virus's arrival among humans were already in place. In our home, our place here in Calgary, I note that our child has, during this time, built a type of yurt in the living room. He doesn't know that the term living room refers to a period when people displayed their dead in the parlor and gathered in the nearby living room. But for my child, everything now is inside. Thank you.
Okay, hello, my name is Jacob van Heeland. I am at the KTH Environmental Humanities Lab in Stockholm. Can you see my screen now? If you do, you can wave your hands. I'm not sure.
You can see it.
You can see it, okay. Then I'm gonna play this.
Varmduber, the people of Varmdu Group, members 19,097, likes 105, post dated the Easter weekend 2020, 286 comments. To read, click here. Anna. Stores. I have always done the opposite. I try to do as many purchases as I can here to support the local commerce. Is it only now in COVID-19 times that you wish us away from the commerce? With all the respect and gratitude of a summer guest, my family has a summer home at Varmdu since 1922. Eva, I think like you, we should be happy for money and in jobs. If everyone respects to only go to the store if you are completely healthy, shop one by one and keep 2 meters to everyone, then hopefully action is not the big driver of infection. Daria, so what is so damn hard to understand? If you get the call from the authorities to stay home, I think the message is clear. You stay at home. Bjorn, I live in Varmdu and now solve my act by ordering bags that I collect by car in the respective store. That way I have no human contact. Show more. Elaine, welcome to Varmdu. It is a bit strange how some people out here are reasoning. The risk is so much greater that they are infected when they collectively move to Stockholm and work, than summer cottage owners go out to their cottages or shop in our local shop. Eva, Varmdu is not the country. Varmdu is a suburb of Stockholm. Instead, you should think about your bus transport where you sit as packed heroes. Lars. Of course you are welcome out here. It is a free country, which we are all proud of. There is no law that denies you the right to travel, only recommendations, suggestions. We just came home from Kiruna and Jukkasjärvi, where we were well met by everyone, except a bus driver who had a bad day. Smiley face. Eva, you can't compare a stay at Varmdu with an Easter in the mountain world. There I can understand the vulnerability of the indigenous people, and just the attitude that causes the virus to spread. Lars, and whose responsibility is my life? Or yours? Do I not take responsibility for you, and do not I ask that you take responsibility for me? Johan, I'm so glad to read your post. I welcome the summer guests with open arms at any time of the year. Sincerely, shop owners out here. Matthias, you are welcome to stay away in the summer too. Smiley face. Mika, thousands of people will die in Sweden before understanding what needs to be done. Guillermo, Mika, I respect your concern. Take care of yourself and be aware of your own choices. To put so much energy into controlling someone else's choices is probably something I will not waste my energy on. I have let go of what I cannot control. Lena, we must be strong together. Linda, maybe even better to do as in Norway, given that people do not understand, forbid people to go to their summer cottages. I can mention here that I have a sister who lives in Spain, and that country is approaching 15,000 deaths by storm. Everyone can use their common sense. It's the Swedish, show more. Anna, feeling pretty chased away. I'm not traveling now. See previous comments, so now you calm down. Smiley with sunglasses. Varmduber, the people of Varmdu group, men.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for doing this. I just thought I'd play a little bit of this concert we did last night. It was live with the Nightingale in Berlin, Lem Belloc singing in Paris. I was playing the clarinet in New York. Are we allowed to hear anything? Maybe not. So I spent a few years doing this kind of thing in person, going to Berlin, going out at night, performing with these birds, listening to how they react. And, you know, I'd much rather do that be really there together making music with these characters from another species, these musicians who are more than human, these birds. But, you know, it's interesting, you know, nobody can go anywhere. Think of all the energy we're saving. Just not flying to Berlin to do this, doing it remotely. Isn't it amazing we have technology that can do this? It's both sad and inspiring at the same time. Although we couldn't get headphones on the bird, he's listening to this. We have a speaker out there. He's responding. And I know this particular bird. They come back to the same trees every year for like 7 or 8 birds. I've played with him before last year. That special sound you just heard, that's called the Buri sound. That's the sexiest sound these male nightingales make. That's what the female nightingales are really excited by. That's a very hard sound for humans to imitate. We can imitate all the other ones, but that sound is really in the world of birds. So that's my contribution to everyone today. I'm glad you can hear this. You can hear more of it later. We'll be doing more live events like this. And it's a consequence of the world today. We're in different places, but we can communicate using this technology that we have even beyond the human world to the more than human world. And I think we need to do that if we want to make any sense of what humans are doing to the planet. We have to communicate beyond the boundaries of our species and connect all these kinds of things together. So thanks a lot. Great to see all these people here together, and let's do more.
Howdy, folks, can you hear me? I'm Bob Herendeen. I live in Burlington. The pandemic shows an inkling that we can exist and maybe even flourish on less consumption and environmental impact. But the pandemic also shows dramatically that equity and inequity are driving factors in all of this. From 1970, and I was present there, to now we translated from controlling polluters, sort of a tech fix, to looking at all of us carefully. So here are a few images. Let's see how I do this. I went to an elementary school in 1970, and I emphasized the American landscape that we had to try to preserve. I laughed about the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland that had caught fire several times. It was a tech problem that had a tech fix. But I also yelled at the students about how electric toothbrushes were indicators of utter decadence and consumption that we had to stop. I had it all figured out. I didn't factor in the fact that I'd driven there in a car, which probably was a lot more significant than the toothbrush. Back then in 1970, we took a look at squirrels and deer and decided that carrying capacity and coming to some kind of a limit was an appropriate thing. We really liked that. We laughed about the idea that exponential growth could be useful for anything. But although we liked the idea that the squirrels should follow this, we never did get used to the idea that people should, especially regarding economic growth and consumption. So that exponential aspect was still okay for humans. Here's a graph of China doubling in per capita consumption about every 11 years. for several decades. These days, we are back to using metrics, and we know that various metrics show that we are exceeding the ability of the Earth, and especially individual regions, to support life long term. Ecological footprint has some difficulties, but it's one that I talk about here. And somewhere around 1970, according to this metric, we surpassed the idea of a steady state life on Earth. So we're at overshoot and something's going to happen. The pandemic gives us an opportunity to think about living less impacting. But the thing that comes up immediately is distribution. This was a problem from way back before the pandemic, but the pandemic has especially emphasized that people who are saving us from the pandemic while we sit in our rooms and talk to screens are inequitably impacted. When we come out of the pandemic, as we come out of the pandemic, equity is going to be more important than ever. And I think it should be. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maria. I'm speaking to you here from Oakland, California. And I'm going to be reading a poem. And so for those of you who are more visual, I'll be sharing my screen, but I also invite those of you who are not to close your eyes because we've all had a lot of screens lately. The almost great pause. Then we had to stop, and what was essential revealed. Food, water, shelter, sanity, our health, life. Those in charge stopped the sports, stopped the travel, stopped the congregating, stopped the communal dining, stopped the bar halls, stopped the music, stopped the shopping, stopped the beauty makers, nails, hair, and dye. They closed the schools, shook the jails, but the money, it couldn't be still. The court orders stopped, paused, the taxes delayed, but the money, it goes. Can't be helped, said the sharp male economists. It works like this chart and that curve, this shareholder and that model. Put the money here, keep it moving there, pay it back then, preferably now, but definitely then, because the owners are owed. But beyond the lease, clear of the mortgage, the real owners, free from obligation, what do they need? If people, they get profit. If banks, they're not people, legal inventions, entirely governable by the rules those in charge make. Food, water, shelter, sanity, health, life. Plus sharing, please. Real owners of our shelters share for a time. Then there don't have to be real losses, the kind that reverberate. Forgiveness, not moratoriums. Redemption? From the extraction, for the extracted and extractors alike. Squint, you'll see. Coronavirus busy exposing the inessentiality of our economic system, flowing, dithering, pooling how it does. Our care, once meager against the speed of money. How far can it expand? How big can it grow now? Past my health and yours, through my family, beyond your community, to our surroundings, all life in this planet? Let our care explode, yielding the will to pause the upward money flows. The economists, the corporatists, they'll revive the hemorrhaging money must go and grow fiction unless we salvage its meaning, reversing money's direction back toward life. And shortly after writing this poem, I came across an article that the city of Amsterdam was exploring redefining money. And they were doing it based on this donut economics model. So I thought I would share an image of this model with you all. Here, it's from Kate Raworth from her book, Donut Economics. And it shows the two problems that are deeply intertwined, both kind of the shortfall of how distribution works and how we've let so many fall through the cracks and in an economically unjust space, and then also the overshoot where we've passed our ecological bounds. And so the goal kind of moving forward is to be in that safe zone where it's ecologically safe and socially just. And a quote from Kate says, "The purpose of economics should be to help us enter that space and to stay there." Thank you.
Hello, everyone. On this wonderful, beautiful Earth Day, I'm Anna Dobigan from the University of Guelph-Humber from Canada. I'm interested and very excited to be on this online exchange of creative ideas and reflections about how Corona intersects with climate change. My reflection on this are along the lines that we can look at the Corona COVID-19 pandemic as a kind of a dress rehearsal for future climate change. By dress rehearsal, what I mean is that form of preparation that actors do in the theater in preparing for a definite as-if event will take place. In theaters, as you know, actors rehearse by rehearsing their roles, practicing their lines, and thereby preparing for the event by knowing what to do in advance. My suggestion here is that we are all actors trying to understand and learn from the Corona experience in ways that can help us prepare for a future world. I suggest we can do this by asking a couple of questions. How can we compare Corona with climate change? What are the similarities and differences between the COVID-19 response and the global responses to date to climate change? And what does the current COVID-19 response tell us about our human capacity as human beings, as socially organized actors to prepare for the future? By looking at both Corona and thinking about climate change, we see similarities and differences. Foremost in similarities, we see this basic general driving construct of a global threat to humanity. Definitely, yes, if we do nothing about it. We see the political and social narratives on Corona and climate change to be similar in that they are delivered with biases and are characterized by outright denial by certain groups. We see the similarity in the uncoordinated and poorly managed organizational responses to COVID, similar to what we have seen so far to climate change. And I think of, in the COVID context, the recent delays in shipping of ventilators as a case in point. There are differences as well. The social experience of the threat in terms of time and space are different. The Corona trajectory is fast, invisible, and hurts only us, and leaves the natural world alone for the most part. Our experience of Corona is literally in our face now, as it were, where the worst of climate change is yet to happen. Furthermore, our knowledge about who is most vulnerable to Corona, we know with a high sense of certainty, thanks to the medical data we have collected, but we just do not know exactly the degree of vulnerability climate change will have on certain groups in the future. Some final reflections about this come to mind. We can think of Corona and climate change as having some of the same requirements in that we need a broad systems management look at how to prepare for future threats. That science and scientific expertise to model the future is very important, vital, and necessary, and that the collective protection of the planet and its precious ecosystems, including human systems, is paramount. Thank you.
Hello, if I'm on next, is this correct?
Go ahead, Linda.
Okay, my name is Linda Weintraub. I'm upstate in New York. I have been involved with Earth Day for a long time ago. When I was the director of a museum at Bard College, I organized a big festival on the 20th anniversary of Earth Day. So I was really conscious even way back then that there was a role for art to play in informing people about impending global crises. Fortunately, it feels like all our worst predictions have come true. But there were so many things that happened in that first exhibition that I think are still relevant today. There was one person I featured in the show, and that is Buckminster Fuller. And it was a really full exhibition in which we presented his mathematical concepts and the structures that he based his innovative inventions on. There was a whole section with Dymaxion inventions like the Dymaxion bathroom and documentation on the Dymaxion car. There was a whole section on artists who were influenced by Bucky's structures. But two things in that exhibition I think really resonate today. One of the introductory parts when people first entered the museum was to experience and to witness the sources of Bucky's innovations and his inspirations. I was able to borrow the very things that he had on his desk, and they were corals, they were shells, they were bird nests, they were crystals. They were all the simple things that occupy and create an environment on this earth that allows for life to happen. The other thing that we did on that occasion was to play what he called the world game. And this was a day-long, massive, internationally oriented game in which there were many different groups that behaved like teams. And the whole idea of the project was we can all have enough if we share. So what I think we're looking at today is probably the consequences of not heeding Bucky's predictions and not complying with his solutions. So I have been involved for all these many years as an author, as an artist, a curator, an educator, and very much a homesteader, in which I've really been trying to see if we can't create a situation in which art can mitigate some of the problems we're having. And throughout all these years, I have made the decision to not deal specifically with climate change or loss of habitat or any other specific issue that is looming, but to see if I couldn't engage with the most fundamental conditions that were causing the havoc. And that is, I've concentrated on the human role in producing these potential calamities and the human capacity, hopefully, to mitigate the consequences that were so clearly predicted back then. I've done this essentially situating myself between the world of contemporary art and the world of environmentalism. And it's been an exciting opportunity for me to do work that both hopefully inspires the production of new arts dealing with the environment and conveying the fruits of those creative ideas to a broader audience. So I've been doing, for instance, a whole lot of writing, and the writing I've done until now has been geared toward the single component of our population that I thought would have the most potential for actually addressing and resolving the problem of human interaction and disregard and selfishness, and to get right to the core of all of the problems we're having with the virus and climate change and all the other manifestations of that. So the writing I've done up until now has basically been for college art students who I couldn't help but think are so uniquely qualified to carry the mantle to the public. Their very training focuses on creative thinking and communication, and that communication is geared toward, destined for, hopefully for a broad audience. So when I finished my last few books and I was thinking of a way to pursue this goal in another writing project, I began to think about the disconnect people have between the very essence of our sustenance. And maybe if I address that core disconnect and create an environment which somehow relates individuals to the broader situation, some real key changes could be jump-started in terms of changing behavior and changing social conditions. So I thought, well, gosh, you know, food is something we all are interested in, and it is something we share with all other forms of life. And so I decided, yeah, I'm going to write my next book related to food, and it's going to be designed to demonstrate that we humans are entangled in all forms of life, basically through the food chain, and that every living being eats, and every edible item was once alive, and every living entity, including humans, are both predators and prey. And so I thought, well, gosh, you know, my audience had better change, because at this point, college students are adults and their attitudes about eating are already established. I think my prime audience for this project might be children. So I am in the process of completing a book, and the title is Who Do You Eat? With the coronavirus, I begin to think maybe I should have a second title. It's in addition to Who Do You Eat? It might be Who Eats You? I think it's really interesting for us to contemplate the fact that we are vulnerable, that we can be prey, that we can be in environments that we cannot control and do not comply with our desires for structuring and controlling our life. So in terms of reconnecting humanity to all living systems on Earth, which I really believe is the prerequisite for the massive behavioral and societal forms that are needed, I'd like to read you one little poem. The whole book is in rhyme. Each entry is of a different form of life, and that form of life tells the reader who it eats. I very specifically use the term who and not what, because I'm looking for an opportunity for us to connect with the living beings who we consume, and that everything is in the same category of life, and we should, as humans, include ourselves within that broad context. So there are penguins who talk, and reindeer who talk, and skunk cabbage, and nematodes. And I've tried to think of the broadest array of life forms, and each of those life forms tell people about who they eat. How are we doing? Hello?
Aviva, unmute.
I'm sorry if I didn't.
Sorry, I will start again. Ugh. Sorry, I have to start again because now I can't share. Are you seeing this, the screen share now?
Yes.
All righty. Okay, sorry for some glitches. We were talking about the pandemic. I said, if we imagine Mother Earth as real and sentient, then she has designed the best installation performance event ever. Lock up all the humans and make them forage for toilet paper. Life could not have designed a better piece of art. If we assume that art must affect audiences, what greater audience could there be right now?
Freedom of speech is the right to communicate one's opinions and ideas without fear of retaliation or censorship. Any act of seeking, receiving, and imparting information or ideas, regardless of the medium used. Superior to all. There must be a positive passion for the public good, the public interest. And this public passion must be superior to all private passions. John Adams, 1776.
Hi, all. Aviva, unmute. Mute. Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marissa. We're going to share an illustrated piece on connecting social protection and climate justice now and in the future. I'd like to thank my collaborators, Jessica Russo, Molly Bertolacini, Khalil Shaid, Erica Holloman, Jalissa Williams, Alexis Curitin, and Michelle Hassan. For many Black and Indigenous communities, land stewardship and meeting personal needs for life, work, and play within walking distance are part of strong spiritual traditions. And yet, human-driven excesses of industrial society of the 21st century have led us to confront deep disturbances in our ecosystems, from viral pandemics to climate change, with deeply rooted racial inequity. Decades-old housing policies spurring from the New Deal era explicitly sought to increase and segregate housing, both exacerbating our climate impact while making us more vulnerable to dual health and climate crises. The COVID-19 pandemic demands that we now confront the degree to which our economic production has taken priority over our health, well-being, and justice. Stimulus dollars provide temporary relief, yet do nothing to address the fault lines inherent in our system. Protections for renters and workers may allow people to stay in their homes temporarily, but fail to address mounting debts or inability to build long-term wealth through clean, safe jobs. The crisis has shown us what is really valuable in our society. We took key services such as public school teachers, grocery, and transit workers for granted during normal times. Normal times also forced us into lifestyles and livelihoods that pitted our well-being, our jobs, livelihoods, leisure activities, and social status at odds with the health of our environment and shared ecosystems. Returning to business as usual would only continue the crisis and mean that public health and climate change do not get the attention they deserve. Instead, what if we reimagine what social and environmental prosperity means so that sustainability is inclusive of frontline workers and communities, that rebuilds local living economies with national and even global coordination? Our response to the pandemic shows us that we, as ordinary people, can make substantial change. While change may seem challenging in the short term, in the long term, it serves our vision for human development. While this may seem like a new concept for society, for many of us, the relationship between the environment and human well-being is at the heart of every decision we make. Thank you.
I'm ready to go.
Go ahead.
Is this good? So this is my emotional weather report concerning COVID-19 meeting up with climate change and what changed or didn't change. It's the end of the world as we know it, but I feel fine, according to REM. The title of this piece is called Imaginative Daring, or How I Learned to Love Being the Existent in the Existential Again, inspired by Benjamin Fondin and Clarice Lispector. So we've all heard of climate change. There's a word for that. It comes from anthropocentric. It means a worldview that considers humans to be the most important factor in value in the universe, that you and I have greater intrinsic value than other species, or at least we like to think that we hold it up as a cause célèbre when it is convenient for us to look concerned about this planet which has permitted us to live. But our time is up. If climate change is the result of what we have been doing to nature in our anthropocentric way, could we not consider COVID-19 a serious response from nature, a lethal wake-up call of what it is really feels like when there is no defense from humanity's greed? Keep in mind that a bit after all the human sacrifices have been piled up and made as a result of this pandemic, will it in fact help us produce a renaissance of human will to daringly imagine how we see our responsibilities anew to planet Earth, and without greed, that extraordinarily intense and selfish desire to have everything we want, no matter what the cost it may be to others, ourselves, but most importantly, to planet Earth. Anyway, have you ever heard of the word miasma? If you haven't, what does that conjure up in your mind? The miasma theory is very, very old, or at least that's what they say. It is an obsolete medical theory that held diseases such as bubonic plague or the Black Death were caused by a miasma, a noxious form of bad air, also known as night air, emanating from rotting organic matter. The Greeks considered it a contagious power with a life of its own. You've seen those narrow London Parisian streets filled with thick fog, which people previously and mysteriously entered and never came out. Inalienable rights for each and every person is a great concept, but the result has proven to be very, very troublesome in our consumer and greed-based world. Even more so if we continue to believe that by returning to who and what we were before COVID-19 will really be the solution. It is Earth Day. That either means something or it doesn't mean anything. Take a little time for what you think you should be and why it isn't anymore, and your position in it all. The Earth is in revolt, and we were all in this together. I'm just going to end, and you can cut me off when my 3 minutes are up, by Clarice Lispector from Agua Viva. I am making myself. I make myself until I reach the pit. About me and the world, I want to tell you about the strength that guides me and brings me the world itself, about the vital sensuality of clear structures, and about the curves that are organically connected to other curved shapes. My handwriting and my circumvolutions are potent, and the freedom that blows in summer has fatality in itself. The eroticism that belongs to whatever is living is scattered in the air, in the sea, in the plants, in us, scattered in the vehemence of my voice. I write you with my voice, and there is a vigor of the robust trunk, of roots buried in the living earth that reacts, giving great sustenance. I breathe the energy by night, and all that is in the realm of the fantastic. Fantastic, the world for an instant is exactly what my heart asks. I am about to die and construct new compositions. I'm expressing myself very badly, I know, and the right words escape me. My internal form has been carefully purified, and yet my bond with the world has the naked crudity of free dreams and of great realities. I do not know prohibition, and my own strength frees me from that full life that overflows me, and I plan nothing in my intuitive work of living. I work with the indirect, the informal, and the unforeseen. Thank you, Eco Culture Lab. Adrian and the whole gang. Let's work together to stop this, okay? And it's about everything we each do. It's not about some highfalutin prophecies and philosophies, getting down to the nitty gritty. Thank you.
Greetings. I'm Brian Tokar, and I'm speaking to you this afternoon on a very snowy late April afternoon here in East Montpelier, Vermont. I'm going to show you some slides from a new book that just came out this week. It's an international collection called Climate Justice and Community Origins of this Pandemic, especially in ecological terms, and the meanings of the current situation for our various popular movements, especially the climate movement. One of my favorite pieces that I've come across in just the last couple of weeks is from my old friend Charlie Kamenoff, a pioneering energy economist, a bicycling advocate in New York City, and a co-founder of a think tank called the Carbon Tax Center that was originally written for The Intercept online and has been picked up by The Nation and some other places. Charlie Kamenoff outlined some key steps forward that emerge from the current crisis and things that have really changed and that help us think about ways forward. And there are 4 of them, and I'll add some points. First, the prestige of science and its inherent value are being restored. Second, the current situation helps us see just how much our well-being depends on proactive, and I would add popular and democratic forms of governance. Third, the crisis is shaking loose the defeatism that nothing can be done quickly. And fourth, it has instilled a renewed appreciation, as we've all experienced, of social solidarity. A key point that I would add that's a corollary of all of those is that we no longer need to accept what were once givens, the constraints imposed by a very different world that we've emerged out of. And of course, we don't yet know the world we're emerging into. In the climate justice movement, we've long relied on people in frontline communities in various parts of the world to point the way toward climate solutions and a greener future. We learned from indigenous and land-based peoples from around the world. We learned from environmental justice advocates, mostly people in communities of color who have been at the center of exposure to various forms of pollution. We learned from people around the world going back to the global justice movement of 20 years ago, focused on the systemic roots of our problems, both social and environmental, and how the two are fundamentally inseparable. People from 5 continents who contributed to this book that you see the cover image for on your screen now, all have tremendous knowledge and wisdom and help us see how the crises that we face today can really help us look toward a very different and hopefully more sustainable and sound and just world at some point in hopefully the not too distant future. Thank you.
So am I up next? Can anybody see me? I'm still seeing Brian Tokar.
You're up. You're good.
Okay. I will be patient. I still am seeing your screen. I've unmuted. Can you, am I on the screen? Oh, okay.
On the screen.
I don't know why. I hope you can see. My name's Ruth Wallen. I'm living in San Diego. I'm going to try to share my screen in a moment. And if someone could just write in the chat and let me know if you see it. Okay. And I'll be sharing images while I read about my walks with trees. In California, 150 million trees have died since 2010 due to the combined impacts of introduced pests, drought, bark beetles, and fire, all made worse by a changing climate. Just as a stay-at-home order was being put in place, I went for my annual walk with dead and dying oak trees. Come, walk with me. I've been coming to this valley in San Diego for almost 10 years. When I first came, all the trees were still standing. As I returned, every year, more trees had died. The small branches which hung like claws gradually fell to the ground until all that was left were barren trunks. Now, even most of these have fallen or been cut down, probably more for the safety of cattle than the rare people who frequent the tiny trail by the creek. I imagine 2020 as the year of a dawning realization that the pandemic didn't start last December or January, but that we've been living in the midst of a pandemic for years. 2020 will be known as the year when many joined in public expressions of mourning and rage, at first for lost friends and loved ones, lost jobs and opportunities, but gradually for the whole array of life that allowed for so much suffering and loss. I came back to walk with the Oaks this year, not just to mourn, but in gratitude, to praise. I came after a week of rain, to green grass still glistening with raindrops, to the pink, purple, and yellow flowers just beginning to bloom. Even this charnel ground is brilliantly resplendent in springtime. Imagine 2020 as the year of praise and gratitude, as we are allowed to return to parks and beaches from which many of us were prohibited for months. Imagine 2020 as the beginning of a commitment to massive restoration. I am reminded of the pollinator garden in the form of a fallen tree that I planted with artist Nina Karavasilides. We used hugelkultur to cover the logs of dead trees with branches, leaves, and soil, so that the decomposing wood could hold water and provide nutrients for the next generation. Imagine 2020 as the year when many commit to serving on front lines for the trees. Imagine a commitment to learn from the resilience of the forest, a commitment to relinquishing chemical pesticides and fertilizers and huge monocultures. Imagine a commitment to regenerative agriculture and silviculture and syntropic farming, a commitment that will serve as the leading edge to ecotopia. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Karis Boak, and I'm coming to you from Southern Vermont. And I want to take a minute to first offer some gratitude to the plants who are my teachers and to the people who have been my teachers over the years, as well as to the soil, the earth, the sun, the wind, the water, and all of the communities that inhabit this planet. So I come to you as a scholar practitioner of anthropology, herbalism, health, and environment, and with a commitment to figuring out what a feminist ethics of care looks like in this particular moment, which, as I'm sure you're all directly experiencing in your lives, is fraught in many different directions. So an ethics of care from where I stand as an herbalist and a mutual aid practitioner and an anthropologist is actually first and foremost about daily embodied practice. This is about how we retrain ourselves to be in good relationship with the earth and with each other. So I'm going to lead us through a short guided meditation, the purpose of which is to offer one tool for experiencing what some of these theories might allow us to embody, and to think about and to experience what connects bodies, the earth, and other bodies, primarily here through forms of breath. In a time when rainforests are cut down, the so-called lungs of the planet, and also many people are now experiencing pneumonia and other respiratory ailments specifically generated by COVID-19 as a disease process, it's really imperative, I think, that we return again and again to our breath and to what breath means and how we feel it. So I want to invite you, this goes for participants as well as watchers, to just take a minute and close your eyes and settle into your body. Go ahead and put one hand on your stomach or on your sternum, wherever feels comfortable, and take a deep breath into that hand. Allow the breath to fill that belly, to fill your chest, and exhale it out in a sound or no sound, in a moment of release or relief. And then fill it up again. Take another breath. Feel the air moving into your lungs. Feel it moving across your face as you inhale and as you exhale again. This air is what we share with the planet. This is our connection of everyone with lungs, which is all of us. There are so many things we share, but in this breath, and I invite you to keep your eyes closed if that's comfortable and take another breath in. In this breath, we link ourselves. So take a moment and imagine there is a connection grounding you down through the floor of the room that you're in, into the soil below you, through the mantle of the earth, into the warmth below. These bodies are made of the same things that earth is made of. What would it look like if we practiced an ethics of care for each other, for ourselves, for the planet, that started with knowing ourselves as part of the earth? This is a gift that herbalist teachers have given me, to think of myself, my body, our bodies as part of the earth. What if the questions that we asked ourselves about how to be together started from a bodily connection between ourselves, started from connecting everyone with lungs and everyone with flesh and everyone with a need for survival that is about togetherness rather than separation? Those are my questions for you today. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Mark Anthony Arsenio, and I'm from The Ohio State University. Like others here, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, and thank you to Adrian, Haley, and everyone else at the Ecoculture Lab for organizing this very engaging event. Since February 2018, I've been conducting research with wine growers on environmental and other forms of change in central Ohio and Alsace-Eastern France. And over the last few weeks, some of my informants on both sides of the Atlantic have graciously shared with me how the coronavirus their lives. Today, I'd like to share 2 word clouds that I generated based on their initial responses to seasonal or annual follow-ups conducted over email. For those who may be unfamiliar with word clouds, they're simply visual representations of frequency. The more often a word appears in the source text, the larger it will appear in the image. I want to note from the onset that not everyone was asked the same question. Individuals wrote at various lengths, and some wine growers also responded to preliminary clouds, which I've also included here. While a lot of the context gets lost in the cloud, so to speak, word clouds do illustrate common themes and offer opportunities for further questioning and analysis. Looking at some of the larger terms in this first word cloud, wine growers responded to questions about how a warmer winter or the recent rainfalls in this region might affect the grapes. At this point, Central Ohio's environmental conditions have woken the dormant vines at a time when we are also seeing consistent morning frosts and daily temperature extremes that could prove detrimental. This timing plays into wine making, particularly when this is usually the point in the wine cycle for vines to be. Wine growers' concerns over frost and drought, the sécheresse, are accentuated in Alsace because of an increase of wind and excess heat over the last few years. A warm start to this year's wine cycle may most likely affect water reserves that would otherwise be necessary to make it through the summer. As wine growers hope for the rain to come, they're trying to mitigate losses through their pruning techniques. Despite differential impacts of climate change, wine growers seem to share similar experiences during this time of crisis. As one Central Ohio put it, the vineyard and winery have provided an outlet to be outside. While an Alsatian wine grower declared, "Nous sommes confinés dans les vignes, quoi de mieux?" We are confined to the vineyards, what could be better? By and large, wine growers are able to catch up on day-to-day operations, for the vine certainly does not stop growing just because there's a pandemic. And though they are able to spend more time out in the fields, their time and interactions with people have drastically become limited following various social distances. In addition to Facebook posts that encourage faithful clientele to continue buying wine, sales in both regions are taking major hits, especially as many are smaller scale and sell direct to consumer. As we look toward an ecotopian world, we might envision one where vineyards will need to be able to sustain the challenges imposed by such global threats, including, but not limited to, health pandemics and the impacts of climate change. This relies on a more or less stable weather pattern, the ability, as one wine grower put it, to adapt to changes to the changes, and logistical financial structures more localized and non-dependent on larger than necessary workforces to be profitable. As we march onward, engaged ethnographic work, virtual or otherwise, remains important in times like this, when articulations of place-based experience help to provide local narratives of global phenomena. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Christopher Trisas from Cape Town, South Africa. I'm an ecologist and I research climate change impacts to species and ecosystems. And I'm going to show you an animation of some research we did recently showing the impacts of climate change, potential impacts of climate change to biodiversity. And this is called Flattening the Curve of Species Loss from Climate Change, because the research shows that while there are massive risks of climate change to biodiversity, if we rapidly reduce fossil fuel emissions during this decade and move to a low carbon pathway, we can still save thousands of species from extinction. So this animation shows the proportion of species in each ecosystem on the planet exposed to climate change over the coming century under a high greenhouse gas emission scenario. You'll see the tropical oceans are where the risks manifest first, and then they spread to the tropical forests, particularly in Latin America, Africa, parts of India, by the middle of the century. Towards the end of the century, the risk spreads to higher latitudes. It spreads into North America, parts of Europe, further south in Africa, South America, and Australia. The outcome doesn't have to be this way, though. If we rapidly reduce fossil fuel emissions to keep global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius, this will massively reduce the risk for biodiversity. So let's play that movie again. Here you're seeing what the risk looks like if we adopt a low greenhouse gas emissions pathway. By 2030, many fewer places are at risk. The risk still expands, but by mid-century, it is much, much lower than it was in that previous animation. Towards the second half of the century, the risk still grows, but stabilizes. People in the tropics and the ecosystems they depend on are at risk, but many of those places at higher latitudes are not that exposed. An illustration of what this looks like on the global scale is shown well by this animation, where over 60% of species are exposed to dangerous climate change under a high emission scenario, But if we move to a low emission scenario and low carbon, we reduce that exposure to just over 20% of species, and we buy those species up to 6 more decades for adaptation. Thank you.
FABS, Feminists Against BS, Manifesto in Times of Coronavirus. At 50+ years of Earth Day, we Feminists Against BS's reclaim the vulva as a new order, a new gynecene, empowered and healing. We declare the Anthropocene obsolete. It has demonstrated its failure, its voracity, its misogyny that inevitably destroys humanity by the very Earth itself. The Anthropocene, violent masculinist dominance, has destroyed the sacred, the vulva, the identities that contradict the violence of the male dominance. The word Anthropocene comes from the Greek anthropo, meaning man, human, humanity, comes from the Latin homo, meaning man. Women are not human according to an etymology that reflects historic neglect. We reclaim our name. We reclaim the vulva, the place from which we all came. We center that which has been repressed. The female, even as we ourselves identify as all genders. We center the word gyn because the word creates and does not destroy. This word is sacred and healing. We reclaim a present censored, enslaved, erased by a history of destruction and domination. Gyn, Pachamama, Earth, Gaia, have been erased by the masculinist Anthropocene principle. Let us witches, bitches, wookes, queers, trans folks and all who have been beaten and colonized by the masculinist death drive work together to restore, reclaim the obstructed and decimated life. Let's create a world where the female is centered, where the vulva, labia, genesis, breasts are centered. Let's create a world where queer bodies, trans bodies, degraded bodies are centered, where nature reclaims her power. Earth is land, soil, dirt, tierra, la tierra, Pachamama, Mother Nature, vulva, life. Witches, brujas, sorcerers, curanderas, the ones that heal, have been demonized in order for the Anthropocene to rise and destroy. We witches denounce the big Trumpkin, the supreme oligarch of the Anthropocene, a product of brutal greed and misogyny, a product of white supremacy, colonial arrogance, and a complete detachment from the interconnectedness of life. The world exists because of us. The world exists because of us women, trans folks, people of color, queers and outcasts. We make it anew each and every day, and we will not allow the anthropo principle to destroy the earth. The big orange one is a terrorist that destroys in pursuit of his own narcissism and criminal goals and greed, followed by terrorists that want to submit and destroy women, queers, all who stand in their way. They seek to destroy Earth. It is the doom of the human, indeed. Men have dominated, enslaved, subjugated, made invisible, erased the female, the queers, the trans men, erased them from history, erased them from the earth, and its damage is profound and seeks vengeance. We are the warriors of vengeance. We are the warriors of a new gynecene. Let us unearth we who have been suppressed for too long. Once free, we will celebrate the earth. We are Earth soldiers, because nature needs to be restored. Without original sin or baggage, free fall.
Hello, everybody, and happy Earth Day to everyone. My name is Anna Willow. I'm in the anthropology department at The Ohio State University. And in my 3 minutes, I'm going to be sharing some of what I've been thinking about over the past few weeks. All right, so I very much hope that my slideshow is showing at this point. Okay, excellent. I have it I had it set up to just play, so hopefully that's working. I'm gonna hope for the best. So on Friday, March 13th, my life, like the lives of so many others, came to an abrupt halt, or so it felt. College classes around the world were replaced by online instruction. My children came home from school dazed and confused, not knowing when they might return. And at all levels, the arts, sports, religious services, and other forms of togetherness went into hiding as people became socially distanced avatars of their former selves. Anxious talk of COVID-19's imminent arrival dominated all frequencies. Shelter-in-place orders brought nearly all economic activity to a standstill. Unemployment skyrocketed. How long will it last? How bad will it be? Innumerable unknowns make it difficult and terrifying to imagine what might lie ahead. I admit, though, that some of us had been hoping for a long time for something to slow the pace of greenhouse gas emissions and buy time in the global fight against climate change. Authors like permaculturalist David Holmgren argue that if even 10% of the population switched to more self-reliant community-based economies, the resulting contraction might keep the juggernaut of consumer capitalism from driving the world over the climate change cliff. Long before 2020, it was clear to me and other supporters of transition, a movement that aims to build local resilience in anticipation of the conjoined challenges of climate change and declining fossil fuel availability, that Western industrial culture was in crisis. In recent decades, countless citizens have come to realize that given the grim environmental prospects of the Anthropocene, the civilization that led us to our current situation will not carry us beyond it. But no one anticipated this. Everywhere it hit, the pandemic brought about drops in greenhouse gas emissions, but these reductions are not projected to last. On the contrary, many analysts fear a severe blow to climate change mitigation planning. As newscasters joke about home quarantine as our new normal, the vast majority of citizens appear oblivious to the reality that climate change will ultimately kill exponentially more people than the present virus, and unaware that the old normal they long to reclaim is itself deeply flawed. My work in progress considers what could come after the current crisis from a perspective informed by my ongoing research on and participation in the transition movement. Transition calls on us to reassert control over the future by reclaiming the stories we tell about human trajectories and possibilities. Its proactive, positive approach offers an alternative to dystopian forecasts about the world climate change will deliver. I'm also convinced that an anthropology that aims to change the world is not only possible, but also necessary. Showing others that it is possible to live differently has been part of our project since its inception. And so I'm working toward what I call an ethnography of the future that presents stories of the future as imagined by transition participants. The future they describe is a world of more nature and less grass, green gardens and green energy, finding fulfillment and self-sufficiency, and cultural values that scorn consumerism. It is a world of community and ecological connection. I suggest not only that how we envision the future is culturally constructed and therefore deeply contested, but also that how we imagine the future has very real effects on the world we ultimately rebuild. I aim to use ethnography to demonstrate what a positive post-pandemic and low-carbon future could look like. I call on engaged environmental citizen scholars to use our current reset as an opportunity to demand a different and better way of life. I can't create an entire world in these few closing seconds, so I'll share just one brief moment from 2040, words from myself as a resident of the future. My favorite time of day is finally here, the late afternoon hour when I complete a fulfilling day of work and turn to my patiently waiting dog. It's time to walk. Shoes and sweater on, I open the door and inhale deeply. The day is crisp and clear with hints of early spring and my neighbor's chickens in the air. Distant windmills turn slowly in the light breeze. Down our wooden front stairs and onto the path, we pass the homes and gardens of friends, the neighborhood corner market and cafe, and the school where my children used to attend. The chorus of frogs grows louder as we approach the forest. The strengthening sun on my face promises warmer days ahead. How is your moment different? What happens next? What lies beyond? That is up to you. Thank you.
Hello. When I heard the bell ringers had to stop ringing due to distancing in Europe, I suddenly recalled the sounds of morning bells I'd heard in Portugali, in Mayfield, and in Geneva, as a simultaneous emergence of sound in memory and imagination. As we are shifting to digital communication and creative expression and refining latency, algorithms, and enhanced reality, I have been interested in expanding sensory perception as an enhancement to distance perception and expression. While under stay-home directives, not all of us have access to listen to natural sound fields in person. Not all of us have access to technology. Some of us have no access to technology. Can we exercise memory and imagination to bring the experience of the natural sound field we are part of inside? And as an affirmation, store its effect in the body and contribute to its renewal in the aftertime and to our symbiotic evolution. This is a guided meditation influenced by esteemed composer Pauline Oliveros. Can you imagine the sound of all the tower bells you've heard to mark a morning? Can you imagine the sound of a lake you have stood beside, stepped into? Can you imagine the sound of pebbles on a shoreline stirred by waves? Can you imagine the sound of all the heartbeats for a mile radius? Can you imagine the sound of a page turning at the beginning of a book? Can you imagine the sound of a child's breathing while sleeping? Can you imagine the sound of all the times someone has spoken your name to you? Can you imagine the sound of all the footsteps you've ever taken? Thank you.
Hello, hi. Hi. Oh, I don't know.
Go ahead, Nelly. I will share your video.
Yes. Não tem som. Don't have sound.
Can you hear the sound?
No. tem som. Não tem som. Oh, no áudio. So, no audio. Don't have a sound. You need to microphone. So, it's okay. Thank you, Maria. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I am Nelly Azevedo. My name is Nelly Azevedo. It's good to talk to you, but I don't speak English. So, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Maria. Thank you.
Okay. And I would also like to say thank you. Not sure if I'm on. Okay, I believe I may be on. Back to me, Adrian Ivachiv, here in my bedroom in Burlington, Vermont, near the shores of Lake Champlain, the traditional territory of the Western Abenaki people, near the meeting place of the Northern Appalachian bioregion and the Great Lakes St. Lawrence bioregion in North America. And I wish to thank everyone who's presented here from around the world with their multiplicity of voices and perspectives, presented from Brazil, South Africa, Sweden, Australia, Canada, the United States, elsewhere. I also wish to very especially thank the producers, Kevin Chu and Seth O'Brien of the Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources at the University of Vermont, without whom we couldn't have done anything here. And I want to thank the audience who's stayed with us here. I'm glad to see people commenting on YouTube. Feel free to rewatch what's there. We will try to edit it into something that's a little bit more manageable. We also have a comment form on the event page. If you go to ecoculture.net to the website, you'll find it there. Forgive the unplanned pauses and the glitches, but keep in mind that all of the video conferencing that so many of us are doing these days actually uses a lot of resources and is ultimately probably not sustainable. Laura Marks and others at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, Canada, are calculating how much energy it uses for us to have shifted into all this online communication. So yet one more thing to think about. Thank you for joining us. Please join the talk by Nalini Nadkarni, a very prominent forest ecologist, talking this afternoon at 4:30, and tomorrow afternoon at 4:30, a talk by Marina Zurkow and Una Chowdhury, both of them artists working on the cusp of environment and art and climate activism. 4:30 again, please go to the ecoculturelab.net website. We have links to those events. Thank you very much, and we will end things here. Happy Earth Day.